165th episode of Robservations, the show about something, is brought to you by the first annual Intergalactic Imagination Connoisseurs Film Festival. You've made your movie, haven't you? You've submitted it. Really? I don't have it. Well, you better double check because there's only a couple days left where you can submit your entry, and I'd hate it if you missed out. Well, greetings, Imagination Connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi, your archbishop of banterbury, your chancellor of cheerfulness, and something new, your gatekeeping twat. That's right, gatekeeping twat. That was hung on me today. Thanks for that. And of course, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, coming at you, robcasting at you, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, the greatest community on the web. How is it to be an imagination connoisseur a day after Thanksgiving? Did you all have a good Thanksgiving? Did you all stay safe? Did you all eat a lot of great food? We certainly had a lot of great food here. There's a lot of it left, which is always a benefit, and it's always a side effect of Thanksgiving. You get to eat turkey for the next month. It's fantastic. And then for Christmas, you have another turkey, and you get to eat turkey all the way into January. And for a turkey lover like myself, well, it's a good day, isn't it? And you know why it's a good day? It's a good day because we get to talk about Star Trek, my favorite thing. I love talking about Star Trek, but specifically, we're going to talk about the latest episode of Star Trek Discovery. But before we get to Star Trek Discovery, I'm going to take you on a little journey, a roundabout journey through Star Trek history. And we're going to begin by talking about, hang on one second, I got to get my hair out of my face because I can't see. We're going to talk about the term Mary Sue. That's right. Do you know where the term Mary Sue came from? Star Trek. That's correct. Mary Sue came from Star Trek. And the first instance of a Mary Sue story was actually in a Star Trek fanzine. For those of you who don't know, those were, mimeographed magazines published by Star Trek fans a long time ago. And it was a big part of fandom really before the internet. I don't think anyone even publishes fanzines anymore, but they were a big part of course, my youth. I bought a lot of them. Then, of course, Trek magazine would publish these great books, the best of Trek, that had all kinds of essays and examinations into Star Trek that were compiled from the magazines that they published. And they're great books. I highly recommend them even today. And I found Paula Smith, who used to edit a fanzine, wanted to sort of explain what a Mary Sue story was. And so she wrote a quick example of a Mary Sue story. Here it is, again, by Paula Smith. Gee golly gosh, gloriosity, thought Mary Sue as she stepped on the bridge of the Enterprise. Here I am, the youngest lieutenant in the fleet, only 15.5 years old. Captain Kirk came up to her. Oh, Lieutenant, I love you madly. Will you come to bed with me? Captain, I'm not that kind of girl. You're right, and I respect you for it. Here, take over the ship for a minute while I go get some coffee for us. Mr. Spock came onto the bridge. What are you doing in the command seat, Lieutenant? The captain told me to. Flawlessly logical. I admire your mind. Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Mr. Scott beamed down with Lieutenant Mary Sue to Rigel 37. They were attacked by green androids and thrown into a prison. In a moment of weakness, Lieutenant Mary Sue revealed to Mr. Spock that she, too, was half Vulcan. Recovering quickly, she sprung the lock with her hairpin, and they all got away and back to the ship. But back on board, Dr. McCoy and Lieutenant Mary Sue found out that the men who had beamed down were seriously stricken by the jumping cold rabies. Mary Sue less so. While the 4 officers languished in sickbay, Lieutenant Mary Sue ran the ship, and ran it so well she received the Nobel Peace Prize, the Vulcan Order of Gallantry, and the Tralfamadorian Order of Good Guyhood. However, the disease finally got her, and she fell fatally ill. In the sickbay, as she breathed her last gasp, she was surrounded by Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Mr. Scott, all weeping unashamedly at their loss of her beautiful youth and youthful beauty, intelligence, capability, and all-around niceness. Even to this day, her birthday is a national holiday of the Enterprise. That was Paula Smith's example of what a Mary Sue type of a story is. But that was in a fanzine. Now, in the 80s, after Pocket Books started publishing Star Trek novels post-Star Trek The Motion Picture, which began with Vonda McIntyre's excellent The Entropy Effect, there was a Star Trek author named Diane Carey. And she actually published novels that were officially released Star Trek novels that were Mary Sue stories. That's right. They officially released Mary Sue Star Trek novels. The first was Dreadnought, part of the Fortunes of War series. Now, I want to read you a little bit about this. And this is from Ellen Cheeseman Meyer, and it was published on April 26, 2012 on Tor.com. Tor, the Tor book label. Again, this is Ellen Cheeseman Meyer. There is a fine art to reading a Mary Sue. You have to remember how much work the character has put into getting to the point of whatever fabulous opportunity she's going to conquer with her wits, her love, and whatever skills she happens to have at the moment. You have to respect the challenges of that moment. You have to allow yourself to be glad to see her. You have to be ready to throw your arms around her and wish her all the best. You have to welcome the opportunity. Diane Carey's 1986 novels, Dreadnought, and also, so we know what we're talking about, Battle Stations, Dreadnought and Battle Stations, offer a fabulous opportunity to practice your Mary Sue appreciation skills. Lieutenant Piper wants to command a starship. She's spent years in Starfleet Academy and in command training. She's worked hard to hone her skills in the hope that she will one day be almost as awesome as her idol James T. Kirk, and that day has finally arrived. Yes, it has. As Dreadnought opens, Piper is facing the Kobayashi Maru with nothing but her wits and the communicator in her pocket. She endears herself to Kirk by using the communicator to crash the simulation computers, winning herself reassignment from a posting on the Magellan to a more prestigious berth on the Enterprise, because that is how personal assignment works in Jim Kirk's fleet. Taking the only sensible course available to her, she dumps her boyfriend because he's distracting and she's fabulous, which you already know if you looked at the awe-inspiring 80s perm on the cover of the book. She heads for the Enterprise and gets reacquainted with her culturally diverse and co-educational group of roommates. Piper also has a Vulcan frenemy, Sarda, who hates her because she revealed his interest in weapons design to Starfleet, resulting in his being ostracized by Vulcan society. This seems like a pretty good guarantee that her life will be interesting. Before she can even change into a proper uniform, Piper is dragged into a struggle involving a fascist plot to take over the galaxy and a phone call from Piper's ex that the Enterprise can only answer if Piper is physically present on the bridge. It's an entertaining story, with bad guys who are really bad, a dash of moral ambiguity, and a hefty dose of hero worship for one Captain James T. Kirk. Mainly, it's a vehicle for Piper to show her stuff. And show it she does. While locked in the fascist brig with Sarda, she shows her libertarianism. Since he can't run away, she lectures him on the Third World War and the importance of individual striving. As any Vulcan would, Sarda assures her that hers is a completely logical vision of how the world works, and then individually strives to escape their shared cell the second the power goes out. Because he's a nice guy, he lets her out too. Piper then proceeds to individually strive to release Captain Kirk from captivity by persuading her friend to join her in doing the bunny hop to create a diversion. Somehow, the fascists are defeated, and Piper gets a medal and a promotion. And what does a newly promoted commander who is also the youngest ever recipient of a seriously shiny medal do next? She goes sailing with James T. Kirk on a ship named after the social worker he loved and all but shoved under a truck to defeat the Nazis. Piper knows none of this, but it adds some interesting textures to the scene. This seems like a high-pressure vacation for someone with no sailing experience, and indeed, she spends a lot of time trying to eavesdrop on her superiors, who seem to be talking about her a lot. And when they aren't correcting her knots, we learn nothing else from Piper. If we learn nothing else from Piper, let us learn that competitive sailing with people you want to impress does not make for a relaxing vacation, especially when they get arrested mid-cruise. Now, I'm not going to read any more of this, but I will end this article. To rescue her not yet appropriately stoic love from bad people with the transwarp drive, Piper and her roomies cross the galaxy in a construction tug and put on disguises to infiltrate the planet where Kirk once encountered Jack the Ripper. As a libertarian, Piper has a lot to say about the Argelian people, and none of it's flattering. We find out that Piper makes an unconvincing exotic dancer, and she blows her cover to hurl racial epithets at some Klingons. Kirk shows up just in time to create a distraction with some pigs. Sarda is rescued, and after a series of wacky hijinks in which Piper bends the Enterprise, the day is saved. She's covered in glory, and Mr. Scott wants a word with her. Piper insists that she's declining a promotion this time, and she really needs a nap, but if you throw your arms around her, she'll show you a real good time. Again, that was basically a encapsulation of the Star Trek novel Dreadnought by Diane Carey. That was officially released, as was its sequel. So, hence the term Mary Sue is basically when the author has created a proxy character for themselves and writes themselves into a story as the hero. And they can do anything and everything, usually quite well, and they usually wind up saving the day, saving our other more well-established characters from harm, or the end of the universe, or whichever comes first. And that's what a Mary Sue story is. It's generally considered the worst kind of storytelling, especially when you're dealing with licensed fiction, when somebody writes themselves into their fantasy of being with their idols. I made a Mary Sue movie where I basically wrote myself meeting my idol. and that was kind of the point. Anyway, so Mary Sue stories are just not very good. They're not good stories. They've never been considered very good stories. And I feel that you can see where I'm going with this, that we've been watching for the last 3 years of Star Trek Discovery one long Mary Sue tale. One long Mary Sue tale about, of course, Michael Burnham, who, as it's proven to us year in, year out, episode after episode, that she is the center of the universe, and everything she does inside and outside the chain of command results in awesomeness. And that, of course, is exactly what a show like Star Trek should be about. Anyway, this week we had a Star Trek Discovery episode called Unification III. Unification III. It's actually, I don't know if this is, it could be the first time that there's ever been a Star Trek sequel episode. I think it is. I mean, of course, we had Troubles and Tribulations from Deep Space Nine, but Unification 3, there was a Unification 1 and 2 during Star Trek's 5th season. That, of course, brought back Leonard Nimoy into the fold. Deep Space Nine made Trials and Tribulations to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Star Trek, and Unification 1 and 2 were the way that Next Generation was celebrating the 25th anniversary of the franchise. So, hey, not so bad, right? And I'm going to say this right off the top. I was very excited to watch Unification 3. That's right, people. I really wanted to love Unification 3. Why? Because it was written by Kirsten Beyer, who is a Star Trek novelist. Of everyone who works on Star Trek, she knows the most about Star Trek. And I would expect a certain canonical fealty to the, there you go, canonical fealty to the Star Trek canon. And I honestly was really excited to see what they were going to do with Unification 3, knowing that we were going to get, well, as the title would promise, both Romulans and Vulcans, because that's what unification was all about. That was the idea that Spock introduced in those episodes, that one day Romulans and Vulcans would come back together. Romulans are actually from Vulcan, and pre-Surak, when the idea of logic and mental discipline was adopted by Vulcan society to save them from themselves, the Romulans lit off across the galaxy and found a home on the planet Romulus. Or if you read Star Trek novels, they're not the Romulans, they're the Rahansu, which I actually really liked. Diane Duane came up with that. She's one of my favorite Star Trek novelists. Now, I thought, first of all, that this was going to be a very exciting episode of Star Trek for me, because they were dealing with Vulcan being a founding member of the Federation. What happened with Vulcan? Why didn't they why didn't the Discovery go there like right after Earth? I mean, instead they had to go to Trill to introduce their new character and take basically a side story about a character that, well, I don't know if it's a great addition to the show, but hey, if you're trying to find out what happened to the Federation, let's go to Trill instead of one of the founding members of the Federation. But okay. Now, Vulcan, we find out in this episode, is no longer called Vulcan. It has been renamed to Navarre. Now, Navarre is a word that comes also from a Star Trek fanzine from a very long time ago. And basically, Navarre was created by writer, let me get this correct, writer Dorothy Jones Haight for the 1960s era fanzine Spockanalia. And it was introduced in the song The Territory of Rigel. Navarre, there spelled N-I-V-A-R, literally means to form, and is meant to describe the comparing and contrasting of two different things, or two aspects of one thing, an excellent term to describe the new Vulcan Romulan homeworld. Now, do you know why this term was used? Because Kirsten Beyer knows about these things. She knows about Star Trek fan fiction and Star Trek history. And Leonard Nimoy has even talked about this. And one of my favorite things I ever got when I was a kid, when I went to YMCA's Camp Orkyla during the summer, my mom would pack books in my bag and my suitcase when I went off to summer camp. And in 1976, when I was going to Camp Orkyla, she packed in Star Trek The New Voyages, the Sandra Marshak, Myrna Culbraith edited book of Star Trek fan fiction that was created and put together in an anthology. And there was a story called Navarre in that book. And Leonard Nimoy wrote an introduction to that. So far, so good, right? I'm totally down with this episode. I'm like, Kirsten Beyer's knocking it out of the park here as far as using things. Even Navarre was used in it was a Vulcan starship in a first season Star Trek Enterprise episode in the Shadows of P'Jem. I'm all for it. I'm like, hey, man, awesome. Very, very cool. And, you know, there's a lot in this episode where they referred back to various things, the Vulcan language, and, of course, the characters, as correct, they don't know, the Discovery crew doesn't know that Romulans are from and are an offshoot of the Vulcans, because Balance of Terror hasn't happened yet. So obviously in the Discovery timeline, that is the first season original series Star Trek episode where the Romulans are introduced. So that was pretty cool. So I liked all of those things. And I'll flat out tell you, I thought this was the best episode of Discovery yet. I liked it better than any other Discovery episode. I also thought it was terrible. So here's something that I want to address first. Leonard Nimoy gave us the Vulcan salute in the second season original Star Trek episode, Amok Time. Now, The reason he came up with that, obviously, Leonard Nimoy was raised, and he was an Orthodox Jew. And this, the Vulcan salute, is the letter Shin. It stands for the letter Shin in the Hebrew language. And it wasn't in the script. You know, it wasn't written down. Leonard Nimoy thought that the Vulcans should have a greeting, some kind of a greeting that was appropriate to them. You know, they greet each other with different, whether it's a handshake or something, that the Vulcans would do something like that. So when he would go to, as a boy, when he would go to synagogue with his grandfather, that is what, it's also a representative letter of the word Shaddai, which is a term for God. And they use this gesture in ceremonies. And of course, it's the first letter in the word Shalom. So that's how Leonard Nimoy came to that. So there is definitely a Jewish influence in the Vulcans. I think there always has been, especially. I once heard a friend of mine say that you have to either cast Jews or people of Eastern European descent as Vulcans, like Celia Lovsky as T'Pau, because it seems like that's they have the proper look. Call that what you will, but definitely it was. I've always thought of my grandfather, as a matter of fact, looked like he could have been an ancestor of Spock's or Sarek, Spock's father. He really did, and I used to tell him that all the time. My grandfather had no interest in Star Trek at all and didn't know what I was talking about, but I did tell him that, you know, you definitely look like Spock. You look like a Vulcan. Well, so one of the things that I thought my biggest problem with Star Trek Discovery this season is the situation that the writers have come up with in the galaxy, this idea of the burn. But it's not just the burn. They now have a generic, it's become a generic societal collapse across the whole alpha and beta quadrants in the galaxy. And it doesn't matter what the burn entails, dilithium, ships blowing up, it doesn't matter. Everything's collapsed. Subspace communications, the Federation, whatever. There's just this general sense of it's the galaxy. We're looking at a post-apocalyptic galaxy. But at the same time, we're now looking at a galaxy that's 1,000 years from now. And you would think, since the galaxy only collapsed, I don't know, 150 years before Discovery arrived, you still had 800 years of advancement and how we as a people, or how the galaxy as a people, would move forward, the kind of technological advances that were made. But rather than deal with that, what Discovery has done is basically they're saying that the Star Trek universe that we knew collapsed, as opposed to a Star Trek universe 800 years from Discovery's time collapsed. And they really haven't, aside from some spiffy holographic technology, they really didn't progress humanity very far. Like, would we be living in the transhuman or post-human time? After the Borg were discovered, would we not use, say, Borg implants? We saw in Picard that there were certainly experiments being made. Humanity hasn't really changed in 800 years. And so this idea of unification, I would have thought, what I was hoping for, is that we would have seen that Vulcan would have reunified hundreds of years ago, even 500 years ago. So it took them 300 years or something. But no, the way that show is written, it's basically just picking up, even though it's 1,000 years in the future, everything's pretty much, well, unification's still very tenuous. That Vulcan society, and this is what I found very, very troubling, that basically, in addition to everything else, Vulcan society also is pretty apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, in the sense that it's become tribal, it's become, there's a pecking order. The Romulans are basically, oh, I don't know, the Palestinians, maybe. And there was definitely, I got definitely that kind of a vibe from the Vulcans. And the way they were portrayed, to me, was incredibly problematic. And I found, not only did I find it problematic, I thought that it was also very unimaginative. Because the idea that that Vulcan is somehow, it has to be like every other place in the galaxy, kind of a mess. I mean, Earth didn't seem like a mess. And why would Vulcan, which was a spacefaring race hundreds of years before they contacted humanity, why have the Vulcans been portrayed? I mean, a lot of people would say that in Enterprise, the Vulcans started to be portrayed as assholes. Well, it made sense then because right after, you're dealing with, it was soon after First Contact, and the Vulcans had seen the results of what happens when a race becomes a spacefaring race when they're not really ready. And by having First Contact with the Vulcans, maybe humanity was thrust into the galactic community much sooner than they should have been. So the Vulcans were there to watch over mankind, and we were coming out of the Third World War. It's not like we had a great track record in our past. So to have the Vulcans be reticent to help us join the galactic community made sense. And it was sort of interesting that the way they portrayed the Vulcans. Well, the portrayal of the Vulcans now, especially in this episode, we're now 1,000 years away, further along than we are in the regular time of the 23rd century, where Discovery's from. Well, if you imagine our civilization 1,000 years ago, look at the difference between human, and this is just one planet, but when you're a spacefaring people and you're traveling all over the galaxy, what would happen? What would you be like? How would your culture evolve? And if you wanted to have reunification, according to Picard, we know that the Romulan homeworld was destroyed. Obviously, it was destroyed in, we know that that happens in the future. Star Trek 09 dealt with that, and that's canonical. But why is it that 1,000 years after that event that we're still bickering and we're still acting like there's some kind of, I mean, I understand they're trying to make it allegorical for our time, but it really, the way the galaxy is being portrayed in Star Trek Discovery now makes not one lick of sense. And they've just gave it, and they're not explaining it either, but they just needed tension. They needed to show this kind of, this generic tension in Vulcan society to give an excuse as to why the Vulcans are not sharing. Apparently, the Vulcans created a Stargate-esque system where they can travel anywhere in the galaxy, much like the Spore Drive. And apparently now everyone blames this research for causing the burn. I don't know how that tracks with destroying all the dilithium, but apparently it does. And now also, we are supposed to believe that starships have black boxes in them. So when they because airplanes have black boxes, so why shouldn't starships have black boxes? So when starships explode, you know, in maybe an antimatter explosion, that somehow a little black box is going to survive with all the telemetry so it can tell you what happened to that starship. Okay, but I don't believe that anyway. But of course, Michael Burnham, with her friend Tilly, has figured out, because apparently no one else thought of this in the future, all of the characters that we meet in the 32nd century aren't as smart or as good or as capable as Michael Burnham is. They've now made this character, she is the very definition of a Mary Sue character. She is a character that is great at everything, smarter than everybody else, is way ahead of everyone in terms of even the native 32nd century denizens of the Federation. She's smarter than them. And of course, every episode she also gets to cry, and she gets to have some kind of emotional catharsis where somehow her feelings and her trauma and all of this stuff become the front and center of every episode of Star Trek Discovery. In fact, I would dare say that this entire season is all about people getting over their feelings. I mean, we're expected to believe that Starfleet officers who, yes, have traveled into the future, who have been there for mere weeks, are all depressed because they're never going to go home. They're never going to see their loved ones again. Oh, but don't worry. They'll deal with that in the next couple of episodes. But I've been watching this show, and I'm wondering, how is it that an allegorical action-adventure science fiction series that tells us something about ourselves, or at least it used to, but the franchise as it's existed for 54 years, has turned into basically a story where we're only watching one woman overcome whatever traumatic feelings that she has in her life. And of course, I'm not going to get into the overall plot mechanics of what happened in the episode because it's new. It just dropped, and it dropped yesterday. And I want to give everybody a chance to watch it, and I'm going to go into my feelings about why I think the portrayal of the Vulcan civilization has become increasingly, I think it's anti-Semitic, to be honest. I honestly do. And I think it's anti-Semitic because of the way the Vulcans are now shown to be treating the Romulan people, and the fact that their society, the way that it has been developed. Now, keep in mind, we've only seen it very briefly, but I do want to offer a counterpoint. There's a very smart woman on Facebook. Even though sometimes she's from a camp that I find myself in opposition with a lot of the time. Her name's Kate Stark, and she has done some great analysis of some of the work that even we were doing on the Axonar project. But she wrote something in response to something that I had written on Facebook. And she writes this about last night's episode. I just watched the episode and found it an excellent portrayal of intergenerational and cultural trauma. It also, for the first time in Trek that I can recall outside of comedic moments, acknowledges Vulcans can and do redefine logic for emotional reasons, that they're deeply emotional people who strive for complete rationality but are still fallible. It's also the first Trek to acknowledge that science is not objective, but is influenced by cultural and political concerns. I agree with that, but I don't think that Kirsten Beyer really had this in mind when she was writing the episode. Furthermore, none of this is portrayed as a bad thing, despite the Vulcans and Romulans being in opposition to Burnham. Indeed, she's shown to be naive and arrogant in approaching them with the assumption that total logic and rationality is A, exists, and B, takes precedent when these people have been so deeply traumatized. This approach mirrors a lot of the treatment of marginalized communities. They're expected to discuss topics that are deeply personal with the pure objectivity and emotional detachment of someone for whom the debate is simply academic. All of that is true, but 1,000 years later, this show is now designed to deal with someone's trauma in every single episode. And I would dare say that one of the things about Star Trek is a show about people who have moved beyond their trauma. They're not that they can't recognize it. It's not that they don't have it, but they're self-actualized enough. That's why you're out there on the final frontier. And that's why you're able to do the things that you're going to do. And as Kirk says in Star Trek V, which apparently also Star Trek Discovery has forgotten about, Spock and Michael Burnham's other brother, that Kirk needs his pain. That it is overcoming your pain and trauma that allows you to be out on the final frontier, that allows you to do the things that you're going to do. And I think it's a very odd way or an odd direction they've taken Star Trek, where all the people in it are these deeply hurt, traumatized folks. And we're also supposed to believe that they're the most capable people in the world. I don't think that's so much Star Trek. I think that's a function of of the way the show is being written today. It's being turned into something that it is fundamentally not. It is not a show about people who spend their days overcoming trauma. Sure, there's been great episodes like It's Only a Paper Moon, where Nog had to get over the trauma of losing a limb in the Dominion War. Great episode. And that was a terrific way to deal with trauma, but it didn't define Nog as a person. It didn't become a character trait, where the character traits of everyone on this show now seem to be first and foremost about trauma. Now, why I think this episode of Discovery was great is because, and I'll say this, I thought that this was very, very cool. My favorite part of this episode is when Burnham has to deal with her mother and the idea of absolute candor, which was something that was introduced in Star Trek Picard. And what I find frustrating about this show is they introduce these concepts and don't do much with them. But what they do with the idea of absolute candor in this episode is great. It is great. And what somebody has to do to dig deep and to find something, the truths that they need to face, the truths in themselves, that was what made this episode the best episode of Star Trek Discovery. It was very Star Trekian to its core, and it was easily, I think, the best moment in this entire show, when Michael Burnham and her mother are confronting each other, and what does that mean? And I mean, I won't even get into the fact that why Michael Burnham's mother, maybe that was a spoiler, but I don't think so if you read anything about this episode. And I was watching this, and I was thinking to myself, wouldn't it have been great if they could have figured out a way to deal with these issues in such a way that it became part of a, I don't know, science fiction story? This confrontation with their mother could have been transposed into any other dramatic show on television. And while it was done because of a scene because of what was going on with the Vulcans and the Romulans and Burnham, but really it was a scene that could have been in any other television show where a mother and daughter are trying to be truthful and coming to grips with something. And I feel that this show is constantly at war with itself, because the people that are writing this show, I mean, Kirsten Beyer might, but they don't really want to be writing Star Trek. Because the rest of the show, all of the science, it's all magical fantasy realm shit. And there's no attention being paid to creating any kind of a believable future scientific reality that you can hang on to. And every time you watch these shows, I think they're really hampered by the fact that the people writing the show they don't want to be working in a science fiction milieu. They would much rather be working on This Is Us, or I don't know, whatever the latest iteration of your Gilmore Girls is. And it's very frustrating, because the Star Trek universe is, I think, being chipped away at and sort of destroyed by storytelling that is removing what made the Star Trek universe unique. And this idea that if everybody has trauma all the time, and the Vulcan civilization especially is now shown as, well, it's problematic. The way that if unification would occur, just because you're on Navarre now, they've renamed their planet, but yet they still have to portray the Vulcans as having a problem with their Romulan brethren, as if they are second-class citizens, and this tribalism and warfare. And it seemed to me that it was very thinly veiled West Bank, Palestine versus Israel type of stuff. Now, maybe that was just me seeing it, but I don't think so. And I'm wondering, why did they choose to portray Vulcan society that way? Why did, like everything else, why do they have to make the universe, everywhere you go, in a state of disarray or turmoil because of the burn? You would think that Vulcan civilization, I mean, after all, they were tearing themselves apart before Surak came and brought about the great well, call it the Reformation or Enlightenment era of Vulcan, where they adopted the idea of controlling their emotions through logic. It is a fallacy. People think that Vulcans don't have emotions, but as Kate pointed out, they've always had emotions. It's just they know how to now control them through the application of the teachings of Serac. Now, Kate goes on to write, what's greater is the solution. Burnham must be completely honest and vulnerable. She can't come to them as their superior, making demands for abstract reasons and dazzling them with a brilliant display of logic that forces them to set aside their emotions and agree with her. She has to meet them where they are, as one lost person trying to make their way through the universe to four more. And by doing that, she opens the door by walking into a better future with them. Burnham's confession is not the Kirk speech or Picard speech of the past, a simple summation of American values that shows the natives a better way so that Starfleet evangelists can fly off confident in another world civilized, but represents humility in the face of this culture. This humility and anti-imperialism is what current speculative fiction writers are trying to bring to their works. I can definitely see why TOS fans might find the episode uncomfortable, since it acts as a repudiation of many elements of classic Trek. At the same time, it's really good modern spec fiction, and I'll put it on my Hugo ballot next year. Anyway, I would really appreciate if you could be more specific, because I really can't see the anti-Semitism, and I'm always looking to improve my own blind spots. That's what Kate wrote. Well, I think the anti-Semitism, the way the Vulcans were depicted, it's pretty apparent. And I think that the schism in the Romulan-Vulcan culture, the way they have set that up, is very reminiscent of what's going on in, say, the West Bank. And I think it shows, look, there's a lot of, as a lifelong Jew myself, or at least I was born into a Jewish family, I was adopted, but I went to Sunday school my whole life. I was bar mitzvahed. I had a full Jewish education. And I think that the way, let's just say if you go on any college campus these days, the way that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is being couched with Israel as an apartheid state, it was very interesting to see Vulcans portrayed the way they, let's put it this way, portrayed the way they were. Now, I understand that it is very different from the TOS that I know. But remember, what they have done, what the writers do in this show, is they've made Michael Burnham the ultimate Mary Sue, or as I like to now call her, Space Jesus or Space Messiah. I mean, this messianic impulse that she's displayed as a character from the very first part, the very first episode of Discovery, she has no humility. She believes that she's smarter than anyone in the room, including all of the Vulcans. And then add to that, the Vulcans are being written in this episode as being people that aren't interested in the truth. They're hiding what they could believe, or what people believe is their involvement in the burn, even though Michael Burnham has proven, because Michael Burnham can do anything, that she has figured out that they are not responsible for the burn. Now, why do the Vulcans now have to be portrayed the way they're portrayed? That they're racist against their Romulan brothers? The whole point of Spock's efforts at reunification is he knew, one, it was inevitable, and two, that it was probably going to be best for both cultures. And you would think that if you wanted to do something that was very Star Trekian, that the melding of the Romulan and Vulcan cultures would have created something that's much greater than the sum of their parts. That you would see a civilization, what I was excited to see, and maybe because, yes, I'm still an old school Star Trek fan that believes in seeing something that is inspiring, I wanted to see something amazing from the Unification III would have been the third part, meaning that they would have come together and they would have shown us something grand, something that we could aspire to, something that we could believe in. Give me something in this 1,000-year hence future that's amazing, that as a Star Trek fan, I can look on and go, wow, this exceeded all of my expectations. This is something that was beautiful and something that was worthwhile. But instead, no. Did we get that? No. We're supposed to believe that 1,000 years after the Romulan homeworld is destroyed, that Vulcans are still assholes and racists to boot, xenophobic, then why did they agree to be reunified anyway? I mean, they even show us Leonard Nimoy in this episode speaking about reunification from 900 years in the past. And is his dream realized? Is unification a good thing? No. Apparently, Vulcan civilization, like everything else in this galaxy, is on the verge of spinning out of control. And that we're tribal, and we're arguing, and we're bickering, and there's castes of people that are better than other castes of people. To me, it was a bunch of illogic, because what do people want to do now, and what is Kate talking about here? That, oh, let's make a Star Trek that deals with modern issues. The whole show has become one therapy session for one character or the other. Not to mention all the ridiculousness of making an ensign a first officer. But I don't want to get into specifics. But I just feel that what's happened with Star Trek is what's happening all around us, in that we're losing our. We need to toughen up. We need to toughen up, and we need to stop. We need to start looking at ourselves and stop blaming the world around us for our own shortcomings. And I think that's what Star Trek always told me. And now I'm watching a show where Star Trek isn't about overcoming your shortcomings. It's about facing them with all of your shipmates. And we all need therapy sessions, and we all are traumatized, and we're all broken people. I don't believe that. I don't believe that in the Star Trek future. When I grew up loving this franchise, Star Trek characters were people I aspired to be. They were people that had already overcome their problems. That's why they were out there on the final frontier. And I think this show is almost, in a way, pandering. And not only is it giving us Space Messiah, but it's also telling us that we're all of we're equal, that the characters on Star Trek are just like us, because they feel such pain and their lives are so difficult, and woe is them. I'm just curious what this message is supposed to say. What are they said? What are they trying to tell us? And I think Star Trek, in a way, has become a show that is about a society where every kid gets a trophy, where everybody's special. No, everybody isn't special. And it takes really hard work. And when you have gifts, you spend a lifetime developing those gifts. And it's hard. And it's a long road getting from there to here. And I think that Star Trek has become a show that is all about coddling and let's not show anybody that's great. Let's not give anyone is a role model except our Michael Burnham character. And I don't understand. And maybe it's because I'm too much of an old school Star Trek fan. But it's a show where everything is now being written in order to make everybody. I mean, how many times do people cry on this show? In front of superiors? Where's the chain of command? I feel like this is a show for people that have their prescription antidepressants all the time. It's supposed to make you feel good by sharing in the pain and all of that. Well, I'll tell you, I liked it much better when Star Trek told us that you need your pain. You have to hold on to your pain. You know, you don't have to cry with your mom in order to do your job. And that's what this episode was about. That you do. You need your mommy to come hold your fucking hand when you're going out and facing down maybe the hardest thing you've ever had to face down. But you can't do it without mommy. I don't get it. I don't understand. I don't know what the message of Star Trek is anymore. But maybe that's just because I'm old. And after all, what was I called today? I'm a gatekeeping twat. Goddamn right. You know, if that's what you want to call me for not liking this show, I guess that's what I'm going to have to be called. But I'm not preventing you from watching it. I'm certainly not telling you not to watch it. I'm telling you to watch it. Watch it and tell me what you think. What do you feel about this episode? I'm curious. I would never tell anybody not to watch something, especially if they liked it. This whole show is about sharing ideas. It's a show about being part of the post-geek singularity, being an imagination connoisseur. This particular YouTube show is about free exchange of ideas. And if those ideas are sometimes difficult, well, then we should talk about them. But a show like this, I don't need my mother to come offer me advice and tell me what I need to do in order to get a job or in order to succeed. You know, my mom will be there to support me, yes. But basically, this show tells you that Space Jesus, who can overcome everything when she's finally met her match, the hardest thing she's ever going to have to do, well, mom shows up and sets her straight. That's not Star Trek. You know who sets you straight is your fellow officers. They are the ones that help you. Your friends, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. That's what you need. You need people that are equals to you in terms of advice and in terms of what they've been through. What, Burnham couldn't have a relationship? They couldn't do an episode where Burnham can deal with Saru or somebody else? No. Nope. You know why? Because none of her fellow officers are as good as she is. And that's another problem I have with this show. Every character is secondary, and nobody is as capable as Michael Burnham. So, the only person that she's going to listen to is her mom. I don't know. Anyway, just my thoughts for the day after Thanksgiving. And, yeah. So there you go. I have a lot more to say about this, but I'm going to be curious to see how this conversation develops with all of you once everybody's seen the episodes. We shall see. Now, I have a lot of letters to read to all of you, and that should be, let's see. Well, first of all, let me jump in to see what you guys have been saying. Okay, let's see. Dun, 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 dun. Willow. Willow is here. Willow says, I personally feel the lack of Tom Hagen was more detrimental to The Godfather 3 than Sofia Coppola. Oh, Willow, I 100% agree with you. While Robert Duvall is definitely difficult to replace, do you think a recast could have better served the story than writing the character out? No. I don't think they could have recast. I think one of the greatest tragedies in cinema history is that they didn't pay Robert Duvall what they should have. It doesn't matter. They should have paid him. If you wanted $10 million, they should have paid him. Because the Godfather story, Tom Hagen was such a big part of that story that to not have him in there, I think was a fatal, it is a fatal flaw that Godfather 3 could never surmount. Now, as I've told you, I like Godfather 3 quite a bit, actually. I really do. But the lack of Tom Hagen is a fatal flaw in the film. And there's no way you can't get past that. Jeffrey Moy became a member of the Post-Geek Singularity. For those of you who you can support this channel by becoming a member, and I believe we are about to hit 100 members, and you can become a member for 99 cents a month. It's not a whole lot. You can become a member at larger tiers, but 99 cents a month. And if there's 100 members now, and I think there might be, I'm going to put up my drunk Moonraker commentary. I don't know how valuable it is, but you'll be able to see it. Jeff Yerke is here. Hello, Jeff. Hi, Rob. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I'm halfway through Inglorious Trexperts and have a tough question for you. Please explain to me why Brannon Braga is not the worst thing to happen to pre-Kurtzman Trek since Melvin Belli. Live long and prosper, the Yerk Man. Well, look, when I was writing for Sci-Fi Universe magazine back in the mid-90s, I was the critic at large. Brannon Braga was the guy we loved to hate. He was friends with us. Amanda Finch, who wrote a lot of stuff she was friends with him too. And we ribbed Brannon. Now, the thing about Brannon Braga was he was not a Star Trek fan, and he got a Writers Guild internship, and that's how he got onto Star Trek. He could have gotten onto a bunch of different other shows, but I think one of the things that Brannon did that I will say that I was not a fan of a lot of what he did with Voyager, but Brannon was more of a horror guy. He liked weird stuff. He was a little dark and twisted himself, and he brought that to he brought that into his Star Trek stories. But he did write things. He did write good episodes. Look, he did write All Good Things with Ron Moore, so which is one of the great series finales of all time. And there were episodes, things like Parallels, and there were episodes where his concepts and the execution were pretty darn good. There was more unfiltered Brannon on display in Voyager. And when Brannon and Joe Menosky would get together, it didn't always mix so well. But I don't think that he was the worst thing to happen to Trek pre-Kurtzman. By the way, got to say hello to Mrs. Yerkman, too. Mr. Tickletrunk sent in a super chat and said, "When are you going into Star Trek Recovery?" I probably need to, but I find it interesting. I think that all of Star Trek is being written from a place, like Kate brought up in her article, or her posting, that it seems to me that, look, I consider myself a liberal Democrat, and fairly progressive and certainly left-leaning. But I really feel that what's been happening in terms of where our civilization is going, we're sort of missing the idea that we need to start pushing forward as much as we become self-actualized. So look, I think all of these things, dealing with trauma, dealing with what's happened, displaced, say, indigenous peoples, and coming to grips with our legacy of how indigenous peoples have been treated all over the world, it's something that needs to happen. And I agree with all of that. But at the same time, there's no reason why we should tear people down. I've always said you cannot exchange one oppression for another. That doesn't help anyone. We have to lift everyone up, but we also have to be excellent ourselves. And we have to move forward in a way that if you want to deal with the past, that's fine. But don't let it interfere with progressing and moving into the future. It should go hand in hand. So, in terms of recovery, yeah. Wait, I guess that's my Star Trek recovery idea. David Tapia sends in a tip and says, "Hi, Rob. What are your thoughts on the latest Mandalorian episode? And do you want to have them use this show to continue the stories from both the animated series and add more backstory to the main film series, or tell its own unique stories not related?" That's a good question. Without getting into that, in terms of spoilers, The Mandalorian, especially, this was the Dave Filoni. This episode's full-on Dave Filoni. He wrote it and he directed it, and he brought back a beloved character from the animated shows. I like the connection. I mean, they also teased a character that was born in literature, which I thought was interesting. Somebody that a fan favorite, somebody I liked. And if you go back and if you're reading Star Trek novels in the early Star Trek novels, if you're reading Star Wars novels in the early 90s, they reference somebody that I certainly hope we get to see in the show. But I think you're right. I think the biggest problem that I have with Star Trek and Star Wars now is they're not telling stories that exist on their own. They're leaning way too heavily on stuff that came before. One of the things that I thought was very smart about Star Trek The Next Generation is, aside from having Admiral McCoy, which they never referred to by name in Encounter at Farpoint, it wasn't until the third season. I mean, yes, they did, or they did a reference to the Naked Now and Naked Time and Naked Now. I get that. But for the most part, they allowed Next Generation to progress on its own. And it wasn't until the third season, where they brought Mark Leonard back as Spock's father, Sarek, that they actually had made a direct sequel. Now all we're getting, it seems, is fan service. And I prefer when we see the Star Wars universe pushed forward. But on the other hand, I did think that both the Clone Wars and Rebels were good Star Wars. And so building on to the universe in that way is I think kind of great. And I am enjoying it. Bo-Katan I really liked. I liked seeing who we saw this week, and I did like the episode quite a bit. Once again, I think Dave Filoni's directing chops hampered a few things, but I thought that I liked it. I've really liked the last 3 episodes of Mandalorian, so I've really enjoyed them. But it's a very good question. Paul in Long Beach sends in a tip and says, wait a minute. Someone called you a gatekeeping twat? I'm confused. Is that an insult or a compliment? Well, they didn't mean it as a compliment. I don't consider myself a gatekeeper at all. All I want to see is I want to see beautifully written stories and compelling characters. That's been my desire all along. I think that Star Trek is not... I think that Unification III had a really great idea for a story. I hated the way it was presented. I hated the fact that you go back to Vulcan, which is now called Navarre, and it's a bottle show. The show never went... They didn't go down to Vulcan or Navarre. The whole episode's set on Discovery. I understand it's a bottle episode. I get it. They're trying to save money, but why save that money? Why not show us Vulcan? I mean, we've been seeing Vulcan since the 2nd season of the original series, and now you don't show us what... that's another thing, a big missed opportunity. Brendan Sheehy sends in a tip and says, Rob, your thoughts on the Voyager episode Message in a Bottle? I liked it. A wildly entertaining episode where the 2 EMH doctors need to take back control of a Federation starship. Some of the best humor in Star Trek, and the chemistry between Robert Picardo and Andy Dick is top drawer. I like Message in a Bottle quite a bit. I thought that was a great episode of Voyager. I also love Living Witness, which is another holographic doctor episode that I think is one of the best episodes of Voyager. It's also a great science fiction story. Yeah, so there you go. David Crabtree says, I have to say bravo, just bravo to the entire team involved in the production of Cybertron Falls, the special selection in the first annual Intergalactic Imagination Connoisseurs Film Festival. I was seriously blown away. It was such a fantastic surprise when I jumped on YouTube this morning. Till All Are One. For those of you who don't know, I really wish that this film had debuted for the festival because, one, I think it would have won the Visual Effects Award, but this very talented team, made a Transformers fan film that is quite astonishing. And it was actually put online earlier this year, but the team sent it in, and it is an amazing 18-minute film. And if you like Transformers, it goes into Transformers lore, and it tells the story of Bumblebee and how Bumblebee survived the Civil War on Cybertron, and it's really, really amazing. And I was proud to put it up. So I'm glad you liked it, David. Mr. Tickletrunk sent in a super chat and says, racism is incredibly illogical. Star Trek Discovery is a farce. Well, racism is illogical. And one of the things that I find, so whether it's stated or unstated, the show is, I think, it definitely, I mean, it's trying to be progressive, but in being progressive, it's almost oppressive in its progression. And it's very odd. And if you go back and you watch something like Deep Space Nine, Star Trek has always been progressive. It got away with as much as it could at the time. It's always done that. Nowadays, however, everybody wants their cause. I mean, it's like, it's all an evolution. You know, from the time that Kirk kissed Uhura in Plato's Stepchildren, when you couldn't show that, you're moments away from the civil rights marches of the early 60s and things like that, and the Jim Crow laws, and they were able to put that on network television. I mean, to have Uhura on the bridge alone made a statement that was enormous at the time. And Star Trek has always done that. And this is a show that seems to think that Star Trek was never progressive. But the thing about Star Trek was it didn't have to wear its progressive nature on its sleeves. I mean, yeah, Deep Space Nine did Far Beyond the Stars, an episode that actually dealt directly with racism. But that show was a showcase of diversity, and they didn't have to tell you about it. It was just there, which is the best kind of progression. It's the best kind of diversity. You don't ask to be patted on the back for it. You just do it. And yeah, it's very strange. David Crabtree goes on to say, man, Rob, there are just some really lazy efforts in people trying to insult you on Twitter, such as cesspool. If you're going to make a lazy, unoriginal meme, try to insult someone, use some better-looking fonts. That's what I said. I said, I hate those fonts. That was my response to him, because they are, of course, Discovery fonts. Evan Newman became a member of the channel. Thank you, Evan. I appreciate that. Hapkido Locke says, on the you need your mommy bit, perfect. I would love to love Discovery, but the atrocious writing and character choices make that an impossibility. Discovery is truly awful. It really is. It really is. Although I wanted Unification 3 to be great. Wait till you see what they do to the Guardian of Forever. Fortunato sends in a super chat and says, oh, hi, Rob. Thank you for watching Star Trek Discovery so I don't have to. I feel your pain. I know. Nick Parrish says, what's up, Rob? First, I hope you and the ladies in your house had a great Thanksgiving. We did. Second, I must say that today was a good day. My local comic shop had all back-issue comics selling at half off. When I saw this, I was in heaven. When a sale is so good that it allows you to get mint copies of all 4 issues of The Astonishing X-Men Age of Apocalypse and all 4 issues of Gambit and the Externals Age of Apocalypse for $2.50 a piece, it's time to back up the truck. Well, Nick, I want to thank you for going out and supporting your local comic book store. Good for you, sir. And backing up a truck. I hope you spent a lot of money. And that's very good, and I'm sure they appreciated everything you did for them. Anonymous says, Star Trek, the original series, TNG, and even Voyager and Deep Space Nine formed a lot of my moral compass. I gave Star Trek, Picard, and Discovery a good chance by watching the first couple of episodes. If I continued to give the show a chance, I think it would crush me. I'm sad about them enough as it is. Yeah, I look, on one hand, they murder more people. They've probably killed more people in terms that we see on camera. I'm not talking about starships lost to space amoebas or the Doomsday Machine or something like that, but they kill a lot of people in this show. And whenever they want to, they just whip out those energy weapons and kill some more people. So in my mind, the show's rather insidious, but, you know. Malbrained says, I haven't seen Star Trek Discovery, but like your commentary. It sounds like a product of our times. Have you read Jonathan Haidt's Coddling of the American Mind? Yes, I have. And you know what? This is a show that is written by people whose minds have been coddled. I mean, you know, Kirsten Beyer's, I like her Star Trek novels, and I did like a lot of what this was about, but, I mean, come on. You know, your mom shows you literally have to be rescued by your mother. And that's what this episode was all about. Unbelievable. Wayne Scotting. I like Wayne Scotting. I like that. An age ago, you recommended Legends of the Galactic Heroes on a stream, and I am very grateful. Provided truly superlative world building that filled that Star Trek shaped hole for quite some time. What Wayne Scotting is talking about is my very favorite animated series of all time is a Japanese it's a Japanese anime called, we know it as Legends of the Galactic Heroes. And there's a new remake that I would watch the original if you can. But it's the original is 100. There's a sequel series, but the original is 110 episodes, and it is one of the most extraordinary science fiction television series ever. And it tells the story of 2 warring galactic empires, and it is so in depth, and the world building is enormous. The characters are unforgettable, and it's one of the greatest science fiction shows I've ever seen. As a matter of fact, I bought the hideously expensive Blu-ray set from Sentai Filmworks. Electron Star Collapse sent in a super chat. How are you? And says, thanks, Rob, for recommending the TNG episode Family. It had been years since I last saw it, and I didn't realize how brilliant it actually was. There's an episode that deals with trauma. You know, it's not multiple episodes, it's one episode. And at the same time, not only was Picard working through his trauma about being kidnapped and altered by the Borg, but really it was an episode about two estranged brothers finding one another again. Hence it was called Family. And it was an atypical show for Next Generation, but it was a beautiful show. And to me, it was a great Star Trek episode. I couldn't, that to me is how you do an episode about trauma. Stubble McShave says, I'm thinking of going into Peter F. Hamilton. Ooh, where would you suggest I start? The reality dysfunction. Go there. I think you'll have a good time. Anthony Gonzalez says, hey, Robert, last week I asked you to say something positive and only positive about the prequels. So today, can you do Star Trek 3? Well, you know, I'm not obviously a big fan of Star Trek 3, but look, I think there are great moments. The stealing the Enterprise sequence is great. The music corner score in that sequence is great. And I really do like Shatner's performance a great deal in Star Trek 3. I think he's great as Kirk. And I love the moment when Sarek comes to visit Kirk. I get chills when I think about it. When he says, forgive me, it is not here. And that acting by Shatner and Mark Leonard in that scene, that's an amazing, it's one of my favorite scenes in all of Star Trek. When Sarek mind melds with Kirk. So there you go. Swack Props says, I can't imagine how heartbroken Brian Fuller must be seeing something that he had a hand in creating devolve into something so farcical and so far removed from what Roddenberry had envisioned. Oh, I don't think Brian watches Discovery, but yes, he is keenly aware. Talk about somebody that needs his pain. He deserves to have. And his name is on every episode, but he's getting paid, so that's not such a bad thing. Michael Preston says, I love the Transformers special selection, but how do you get around the Hasbro licensing? And is that the reason it's not in the festival? You know what? The reason it's not in the festival is because it's not a world premiere. I asked people that one of the rules of the festival was that it has to be a world premiere. And I would love to have put this film in the festival, but he had put that film up on his own YouTube channel. It has over 100,000 views. But I thought it was so good, I was so impressed with what they did, that I put it on as a special selection because I wanted to showcase it. And I'm glad people are responding to it because I thought it was lovely. But yeah, it had nothing to do with Hasbro. I mean, maybe they'll come after me and I'll get a takedown notice or something, but I hope not. Let's see. I've got a letter here from. Let's see who I got a letter from. This one is from it's either Gabrielle DeGuti. I hope I got that right. But it looks like it's Gabrielle because there's an E on the end. Hey, Rob, I love your channel. I have a quick, I hope, question regarding the originality rule for the first annual Intergalactic Imagination Connoisseurs Film Festival. I made this short movie a few years ago that I shot entirely myself, but the source material is a scene from the Rear Window screenplay by John Michael Hayes. Would my film not be eligible in terms of originality and maybe copyright because the scene was taken directly from the screenplay? Let me know. Ooh, that's interesting. Well, since you redid it yourself, and it's not, you're not copying Rear Window and you're not using, I would say yes, you can submit it. But I just ask if it's appeared anywhere else, if it's already on the internet somewhere, submit it. But it can only be a special selection. If you want it in competition, it would have to have not appeared on the internet anywhere. It has to be a world premiere. But I would love to see that. I mean, please, absolutely submit that by all means. Omar94 writes in and says, "Hi, Rob. I saw the trial of the Chicago 7 some time ago, and while I liked it, I found the ending..." Oh, you know what? Well, I'll read this anyway. "I found the ending to be meh. This got me thinking how hard it is for creative talent to really stick the landing and end a movie or TV show on a good note. There are movies which have terrific endings, like Shawshank Redemption, for example, with the final moment on the beach. There are also TV shows that can have really good endings, like the series finale of The Mary Tyler Moore Show. However, not everyone can create a great ending. In television, series finales can be hard to pull off. I've never seen Dexter, but everyone apparently hates the ending. I've only seen a little bit of The Sopranos, but I know the ending is very controversial. With movies, it's also hard to end. I like M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable, but I'm always disappointed in the ending, as I always see the ending being the end of the story's second act, and I'm waiting for the third act to start. Another movie which apparently does not have a good ending is David Fincher's The Game. I actually think it does have a good ending. I've actually never seen it, but I'll get to it eventually, as it is on my never-ending list of films I haven't seen, which I have to, so I'll see for myself whether the ending was underwhelming. Fincher felt he probably should not have made the film, as he admitted he was disappointed in the ending, since he couldn't figure out the third act. All in all, creating a good ending is a monumental task, but I'm always impressed with those who can pull it off really well. Thanks, and live long and prosper." Well, Omar, you know, I think, look, a good story has to have a great ending. I don't think any good story can have a bummer of an ending. I think if a story does not have a good ending, you can't consider the story great. All great stories have to have a great ending, I think. And I believe that. So, and I think it is hard. I think that is hard. To have a good ending. But, you know, I think inherent to great storytelling is you have to have a good ending. I think it's part of it. Just like you have to have a good beginning and a good middle. You have to have a great ending. But it is hard. It's hard to end stories in a satisfying manner. This one comes from Emil Johansson. Emil Johansson says, "Rob, I think toxic fandom may not really be toxic fandom. It is in some cases, and in those cases it's pretty extreme people willing to murder because they can't handle how their imaginary babies are being treated on screen. But I believe that in most cases people use the term toxic fandom without having a proper reason to do so. People who might be mean, maybe even bully, or people who heavily criticize something they love a lot are not, in my mind, bad people. They might be edgy people, but they should be listened to and taken seriously like any other group or individual. This is because, in my mind, they often have a point. They might be completely wrong or have opinions that I don't agree with, but I still respect them, and I don't brush them off as irrelevant idiots. Toxic fandom is not an excuse to brush off real criticism. In my mind, the actual product you are working on doesn't become better because you can't handle negative opinions, or because the critics say otherwise. Critics don't always know best. I know people call you toxic because you despise modern Star Trek. I don't think you are. I think you're a real Star Trek fan, and I would argue, having grown up with OG Star Trek, you know better than people who like drama series and edgy comedies that label itself with the same brand. The thing is that people should not be forced to enjoy something because it has an important message or because a lot of people think it's great. If I was working on a Star Wars or Star Trek product, I would be pushing myself so hard to do something that matters, makes sense, and is respectful to the legacy of Star Wars and Star Trek. I wouldn't just write my own fan fiction. But that's what the current people of Star Wars are doing. They only have the name and the hype that follows it. People in my mind have a genuine right to be upset, and maybe if they didn't act impolite or criminal, people would actually listen to them and understand that. Well, Emil, look, I think that the definition of toxic fandom is when a fan somehow bullies in some way, shape, or form another fan because of their opinion. When you start making it personal with people and you specifically go after them for what they like, or you tell them that what they like is wrong. I don't do that. I don't tell people what they should or shouldn't like. I tell people what I don't like. And a lot of people take that as, they take it personally. So I get called a gatekeeper. I don't gatekeep. I think you should watch whatever you want to watch. Like I've said on the show a million times before, I There's a lot of stuff that isn't good, that I know isn't good, that I love. Like, for instance, Star Crash. I bring it up all the time. I love Star Crash. Is it good? No. If somebody says to me, like, they did an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000 about Star Crash, which I thought was terrible. I was so angry that they did this to one of my favorite, my favorite Italian Star Wars clone. I understand why they did it, and I can laugh at them for doing it, and they weren't wrong. But I would never tell somebody that if they don't like, when somebody tells me they don't like something, I don't take it as a personal affront. I mean, I don't. And there's a lot of people that are always telling me what they do and don't like, or if they don't like something. And a lot of people don't understand why I like the things that I like. But I look at a movie like Star Crash, and I just appreciate the love and affection and verve that was put into it. There's so much love poured into that film by the people that made it, and they clearly park their shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay as I do. And while, yes, it's a shameless ripoff of not just Star Wars, but about a dozen other things, the people that made it certainly love those other things that they're ripping off, and it puts a big smile on my face. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what toxic fandom is. And I think more so, I think toxic fandom is definitely a byproduct of the lack of respect we have for one another now. You know, everybody seems, you know what? Everybody's not equal. And when I say everybody's not equal, I mean that everybody has different gifts, different things that they're good at. And just like I always use LeBron James as an example, I look at LeBron James, and that man, he's a magician on the basketball court. I could never do that. No matter how much I practiced, or I just don't have his abilities. I could never be Russell Wilson. You know, I watch my beloved Seahawks play, and Russell Wilson, what he does, the guy is magic. I could never do that, no matter how much I wanted to. I don't know if Russell Wilson could edit a documentary, or I don't know if LeBron James could produce a movie, although he is producing movies now. I don't know. But everybody should be happy with the gifts that they've been given and develop those. But that's the whole thing. You know, everybody wants to act like we're all equally deserving. We should all be equally deserving of respect, and we should all be able to have the same opportunities that everybody else has. But that doesn't mean, you know, what is it? Equal opportunity, but not equal. There's no equality of outcome, and that's the way it should be. I'm a meritocratist. Is that a word? And I think that's okay. I think it's okay. So yeah, I think that, but toxic fans are the people that go after other fans. So there's no reason why you should go after another fan for liking something you don't, or enjoying, whether it's a show or whether it's, and that's where I draw the line. Whenever I'm criticizing something, and look, people are like, well, what about the writers? I will go after the writers. Kirsten Beyer disappointed me with Unification III. I have bought her Star Trek novels. I have all of the Star Trek novels that they're Voyager novels. I've read them all. Actually, I haven't read the latest one, but I bought it. And I like her work. She disappointed me. She disappointed me that the ultimate example of Michael Burnham, that she finally has a comeuppance, and she has to have her mommy come and hold her hand. And I'm just like, really? I was very disappointed. Peter Sober Sosnowski has written in, and this is from New Zealand, NZ. Kia ora, mate. After months of planning in my head, I finally decided to put my finger to touchscreen, thanks for the nudge, Joshua Levesque, and write my virgin letter to Robservations. I love to ramble, but here I'll dive straight in. James Bond. I personally am a Star Wars and Blade Runner nut, but the movies about the dashing fictional English secret agent have been entertaining me since The Spy Who Loved Me in 1977. Ah, 77. That was my first Bond experience in the theater. What bliss it was to be alive in that media dawn. To be 7 was very heaven. Anywho, so I don't claim anything more than a casual fan of Mr. Bond, but imagine my surprise when someone in the Robservations chat claimed Bond is Scottish. I was about to question them in the same chat, but then, something listening. So I decided to check. 2 minutes of detailed and thorough online research confirmed that Fleming's Bond was actually written as half Swiss and half Swiss. He's not half Swiss. Written as half Swiss and half Scottish. No clue as to the origins of the Swiss part, maybe Fleming liked clocks, but it turns out that Bond's Scottish side was added under the influence of the author actually meeting Sean Connery. The films influenced the books. Mind blown. Yeah, Thunderball. Thunderball was written, the film came first. Given that it's a given that there's generally and inevitably a split of canonical fealty between prose novels and their on-screen counterparts, it's especially interesting to me to observe a film adaptation affecting the prose originals. The other point that I initially didn't believe it, but as you always say, something verisimilitude and boobage, mostly listening and taking new information on board, really can help one learn and grow. I like that. Now I'm sharing this news about Bond's origins everywhere I can, online and in meat space, and I am disbelieved everywhere I go. But now, once R&B confirms it, it is so. I really do need to write in about definitively defining speculative, contemporary, period, and historical fiction. You got to write that in. But that's for another time. But to add in the Sieg last, Bond is defined as contemporary fiction, but then becomes period fiction through the passage of time. Laters, and that's regards, Captain Opinion. Well, thank you, Peter. What a great letter that was. Yeah, I'll tell you. I wonder if, how many other franchises have been influenced in that way? I'd be curious. I should look into that. Christopher McCulloch is here. Mr. Burnett. I'm under a Mandalorian media grayout until I binge it after the fact, so I haven't been able to partake in as much nerd discourse of late. But I was delighted by a certain spontaneous social experiment that occurred on the show recently. Out of the blue, you went back to your Amazon purchase history and excavated your own personal nerd CV. So delighted was I that I thought I'd do it for myself. I was surprised and maybe a little worried at how little my interests have changed. Here is my resume for 2010 and 2011. This is Christopher McCulloch's Amazon purchase history. Yukio Mishima's 5 modern no plays. I had just read The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea for a class, and these plays had also come up, and I was primed for more Mishima. Unfortunately, I'm not sure I can recommend these. Introducing Time by Craig Callender. From Leibniz to Hawking's, a primer on the philosophical and physical concept of time, mostly useful as a way to learn how to learn more. A Japanese cookbook. I was still under the delusion that one day I'd be able to feed myself. A book on Venice. Venice is one of the most interesting cities in the world. I like to read about history and culture. Andrzej Sapkowski's The Last Wish and Blood of Elves, the first 2 Witcher books. Thanks to the popularity of the Witcher games, the rest of these Polish books have been translated. I didn't realize that Witcher were Polish novels. That's interesting. Apocalypse Now, the 3-disc full disclosure edition. I think this is a remake of one of the Planet of the Apes movies. God, it's been that long, but now you can replace it. Happy End, the first album of the Japanese rock band of the same name. And Manfred Krug's Das war nur ein Moment. I purchased this East German singer's album after mistakenly thinking it had been sampled in a Mad Villain track. It was in fact another band called Blonker. I'm rap agnostic, but I seem to share in a lot of rap's musical tastes, making it a strange musical digest of the 60s and 70s for me. Persona 4, a Japanese role-playing game. And how much time do you have? I don't. 2012 would see me getting the complete saga of Star Wars, the Star Trek Original Motion Picture Collection, and the 30th anniversary of Blade Runner, which I would say rounds out every quadrant of my nerddom. I still buy most of my sci-fi from a bookstore. Of course, you are not what you buy, but you're also not what you buy. Well, I hope it wasn't terribly dull going through someone else's junk. Christopher, buy more now, buy more, and be happy. You know what? I'm going to throw this out to you, imagination connoisseurs. I want you to go back and look in your Amazon purchase list and start sending me, what did you buy the first year you bought from Amazon? What's that? No matter what year it was, what did you buy over the first year from Amazon? I mean, when I was going back and reading mine, I was going all the way back to 2000, I think 2001. But I think that'd be great. And you can always send these lists to me at the Burnettwork.net website. So I'd love to hear what you guys bought. And just to see it, it's kind of like, it was so much fun for me going back going, oh yeah, you know, I forgot when I bought Spy Hunter for PlayStation 2. Which is kind of cool. This is another letter from Emil Johansson. Rob, I want to talk about what I think the trendy pop cultural zeitgeist can be all about. Whether it's superheroes or whatever nerdy stuff people enjoy, I think that these things are not just sugar and fast food that a minority loves, but the rest of the world think is bad. I think there's lots of potential with pop culture, potential to tell fascinating stories that really connect with people. I agree with you 100%. I think there's a real science to it. I don't believe in always having happy endings or always beginning a story with once upon a time. What I do believe, for example, is the ability for pop culture to showcase harsh truths. Let's say you wanted to portray a city, but a very cold city, like a city that, when you're in a stressful situation, doesn't warm you with feelings of sympathy and hugs. But let's say you have financial issues, psychological issues, no friends, a lot of anxiety, basically really stressed out, and instead of falling only for people to catch you, they look at you with suspicion. They think you're a loser for not having money. They think you're dangerous for having mental problems. They think you're creepy for not having friends, etc., etc. That's not a nice place to live, but it could theoretically be a very real place to live. And through the art of storytelling, people could start to actually think about a scenario like that. Instead of just reacting, I think thinking can make actual change. So in the end, maybe there was a moral to the story, even though it appears to be a very strange story. And who doesn't want happy endings? Why would a story portray a dark reality and not a happy one? It makes you wonder what the point is. But if it gets you to think, maybe there's meaning to it always. I don't believe storytellers should hide things. They should be honest. If they make a scene in a movie, they should be able to explain the reason for that scene. If they have strong opinions about religion or politics, they don't need to hide that in their stories by making the main character have these opinions or react to those opinions and then pretend like it wasn't intentional. We may disagree on this, but that's fine. People could dissect stories and start to think about them in a realistic way and ask questions like, what president would Superman vote for? Or what gods does Batman believe in, if any? But while doing this, it could be fun. But while doing this could be fun, it also ruins the magic. I saw a documentary once about kids trying to be superheroes for real. They ran around on kick bikes and tried to prevent crime in costumes, videotaping drug dealings and taking away car keys from drunk people. In theory, they did admirable things, but I kept thinking that they were just so ridiculous. Comic books, for example, don't work if you apply real logic to them. When I read Scott Snyder or watch Tim Burton's Batman, I don't overthink these things. I just enjoy the ride. However, I still believe there's room to intentionally tell fascinating stories inside of those mediums, and in doing so, maybe highlight actual concepts that otherwise might not have reached out to people. Like what the X-Men did. I don't think people should intentionally put strong opinions inside stories, but I think stories can still have value. At the end of Watchmen by Zack Snyder, I didn't know if it was a happy ending or not, but I still enjoyed the ride, and I believe he is one of many that puts thought and care to what he's doing, even if it's not clear black and white heroics. I've been babbling for too long now. I don't know how to end this letter, but I wanted to express myself, and those are my thoughts. Well, Emil, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us. Look, I agree. You know, I don't think stories should necessarily be ambiguous. And, again, look at a movie like Joker. You know, Joker is exactly what you're talking about. Joker was a story that illuminated certain truths that are not necessarily comfortable about humanity, and I think it was definitely worth watching. And it was definitely a good story. So I think it's right exactly what you were talking about. And so I would say I agree with you. This letter comes from Guy Lloyd Broyles III. Hello, sir. Greetings, RMB. I hope you and your friends and family are well. I'll get right into it as to not take too much of your time. So for the sake of my question, let's assume movie theaters don't make it through these dark days. I'm actually one of those people who wouldn't miss them. I'd be more than happy to pay extra to not have to go and watch them at home. That said, I really hope they can find a way to make it through. I'd never root for something that people love to go away. Anyway, my question is concerning big blockbuster movie budgets in a post-theater world. I feel it goes without saying there would be a big shakeup of the big-budget film landscape. There would be. From the research I've done, and just as a fan on the outside of film production looking in, it seems the 200 to 300 million budget films have ballooned that high unnecessarily. It feels like they spend money very frivolously now just because they know they can. I know The Invisible Man 2020 isn't in the same league as a huge budgeted film, but that movie looks great, was made for $7 million. The first Deadpool is a good example of making a big budget film but also being sensible with their spending. So do you think there's anything to the idea of filmmakers producing big budget movies while still being relatively frugal while doing so? If so, do you feel it significantly lowers production costs? Thanks, my brother. The world needs more cats like you. Your friend and fan, GB3. Well, this is a great letter, Guy. Great question. Yes. Look, I think that one of the things that's happened with movies now is because of computer effects, you literally can do anything you want. You can do anything and you can see anything you want. And one of the things that is made possible, you see this a lot in a Marvel movie, is you can shoot a lot against a green screen and you can create a lot of realistic backgrounds without having to go to those places. But it's still very expensive to do because it's very labor intensive. Doing special effects and post-production work is very laborious, and you can't really do it without a human being spending a lot of time finishing those up. And that's why it's expensive. And that's why you can do anything now. So they feel that they don't really have to necessarily worry about that. They know that an Avengers movie is going to be $350 million. Well, without big theaters to guarantee a return, they can't justify spending that much money on a movie. That's just a reality, because you need theaters to be able to make your $1.5 billion or $2 billion, or in the case of Avengers Endgame, $3 billion back. You need those theaters, and if the theaters go away, the costs of big budget movies are going to come way down. And I think you're right. It'll just look. I've never equated dollar value with entertainment value. I've never once thought to myself, wow, all of that money certainly made a great film, and it gave me more entertainment because it cost $300 million. On one hand, I was wildly entertained by both Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. The kid in me loved it. I couldn't believe what I was watching. Now, I know that together those films, you're looking probably over $600 million to make both of those movies. I feel in the case of those movies, I certainly got $600 million worth of entertainment value. But for that same amount of time, I can watch other movies like John Carpenter's Escape from New York that was made for $4 million when it came out in '81. I'm very entertained by that movie. So in the same amount of time, you can watch a movie that costs $4 million or $400 million. And I don't think the budgets equate to more or less entertainment value. And I think what's going to happen is they're going to have to be that blockbuster entertainment is definitely have to be more budget minded. But I don't think entertainment value should ever be based on money. In terms of I think you can make an entertaining movie for $2 million and an entertaining movie for $200 million. If they're both 2 hours long, are you then going to quantify how much entertainment you got from one as opposed to another? So I think that absolutely that the budgets are going to have to come down. But I don't think the experience, I don't think the movies are going to get, I don't think the movies would suffer. I think people, like you said, would in fact step up and be able to make something of them, which I think is great. You know what? I'm going to save this letter because it's about the Mandalorian. And I'll come back to that. Let's see, Mark. Yeah, I'll leave it there. So let's get back to this. People have sent in. Mr. Tickletrunk sent in a super chat and says, "You have Star Crash. Some of us have Ice Pirates. We all have our guilty pleasures." I agree, and that's fantastic. I love it. Evan Newman says, "Are there any classic literary stories that you would love to see inspire new sci-fi or fantasy movies or shows? Prior to The Force Awakens, I heard someone mention that Shakespeare's King Lear could be used as a great inspiration for a new trilogy. Alas." Well, I mean, Ron, go back and watch Kurosawa's Ron. Look, I agree. I think classic stories, I remember, I think it was Jim Starlin who did a comic book, Gilgamesh 2, where he did a sci-fi version of Gilgamesh. And I think absolutely, I don't understand why they don't do that. Ron, if you went back and used King Lear as the basis of that would be amazing. That'd be amazing. I absolutely 100%. I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great using King. Look, go back and watch Kurosawa's Ron, and you'll see how great of an idea it could be for a new trilogy. Brendan Sheehy says, "So we now have had 5 episodes in a row of The Mandalorian with the same plot and story beats. The action scenes and the breadcrumbs of Star Wars lore being dropped are enough to keep me on board, but wow, is it getting samey? Are people being too kind to this show?" I think The Mandalorian is not nearly as good as it's been made out to be, and I think you're absolutely right. The storytelling feels very similar in every episode. Very similar. And it's kind of it makes me curious why that is, but I still think it's wildly entertaining. I really do, and I watch it. But yeah, it's like every episode, you know exactly what's going to happen, and it's kind of odd, to be honest. I think it's weird. But I find it entertaining, I do. I mean, I've been enjoying it. I liked this week's episode a lot. I thought it was good. I didn't necessarily think it was as good as last week's episode, but I thought that or the week before. But I liked it. I like that now we don't have to say Baby Yoda and the child anymore. That's good. So good for us. But yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle beings, kind souls from across these 28 known galaxies, I'm going to bring this episode 565 of Robservations, to a close. I want to remind everybody, though, that the film that I was a producer on and am in, Movie Trailers, A Love Story, that John Campea produced and directed, is now available on Amazon Video to rent or buy, and it's also on Vimeo on demand worldwide. So you can go in and get it. I think it's a hoot. I was happy to have a hand in the making of this, a movie that was shot really right before COVID and was finished during COVID, and it was something that I really liked participating in because, again, John Campea just thought it up and did it. So that is pretty cool. And I want to remind everybody that there are only 4 more days left to enter the first annual Intergalactic Imagination Connoisseurs Film Festival. Now, remember, if you get your entry form in and pay the entry fee by the 1st of December, you can have until the 15th to actually post your movie. And watch out. There's going to be a lot of stuff coming down the pike in the next couple days. So I hope that if you still wanted to do that, you can. And I want to thank everybody. I want to thank my moderating staff, Mike Bodden, Greg Smith, the Richard. I want to thank the Richard for hosting all these Zoom parties and making people feel very welcome over on the Facebook page for both Whining About Movies and the Post-Geek Singularity. I want to thank Joshua Levesque for being here and Joshua Levesque for inspiring somebody to write a letter. So thanks for that. MC Blackcap is here. I want to thank them, and I think that's everybody who's here today. Oh, Bunyan Snipe's here. Thanks to Bunyan Snipe. as well. Thank you guys for everything that you do. I very much appreciate it. And remember, tomorrow is the 100th episode of Whining About Movies. We are doing Kill Bill 1 and 2. Kill Bill 1 and 2. It's our first Tarantino films. So that should be fun. Join Elizabeth Gwendolyn Bell, the ace, the arbiter of cinematic excellence, and the enchantress of entertainment, as we delve into Kill Bill 1 and 2 tomorrow night on the 100th episode of Elizaviews. I can't believe we've done 100 episodes. That's amazing. I will, of course, be back tomorrow, and tonight, assuming I will premiere it again, episode 3 of Let's Get Physical Media with Dieter Bastian drops. And by the way, we have been contacted by some of the filmmakers of African Kung Fu Nazis. If you haven't watched Let's Get Physical Media, you wouldn't know this. But yes, African Kung Fu Nazis is a real movie. And it's kind of become a running, I wouldn't call it a gag, but a runner, definitely a runner. That's what they call jokes that keep going. We've been talking about it. And apparently we are going to end up having some of the filmmakers behind African Kung Fu Nazis, which is a film that was actually made in Ghana. So very, very excited about that. It's amazing how this YouTube channel brings the world together. But so tonight, episode 3 of Whining About Movies. No, it's episode 3 of Let's Get Physical Media. Anyway, now, everyone you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to everyone, enjoy the rest of Black Friday and have a better day.